From the banks of Dewey Lake, it's the Dewey Pod Monster.
All right, welcome back. My name is John, and this is the Dewey Pod Monster Podcast. This is your weekly and original podcast about consumption, and we are proud members of the Run Podcast Network. You can find all of our previous podcast episodes at yourunpodcast.com, as well as, while you're there, check out all the other great shows at yourunpodcast.com. They're all great. But with me this week is the host of the Dewey Pod Monster Podcast, and his name is Sean. And Sean, I would say come on down, but we're talking about a late night movie, not a daytime game show. So how are you doing today?
Here's Shawnee. How the hell you doing, you magnificent bastard?
Oh, magnificent. I'm feeling better now. But I'm not going to lie, I needed that little boost.
Just put you right over the top, huh?
You know what? My day just went from shit to shining.
Wow. I'm glad I could be that for you.
Sometimes that's all it takes. Sean, it's been like 2 weeks since we talked about the bullshit that we've been watching. What have you been watching in the interim between Iron Claw and this, I guess? So, which sounds like so long ago now that we talked about Iron Claw.
I know it does.
Or feels like it.
Surprisingly, I have not watched anything wrestling related. Well, not professional wrestling. Let's start there,
okay.
I guess. So since the last time we talked,
please tell me you're watching that ICP kid who just suplexes himself into like barbed wire and microwaves and hurts himself, because that kid's pretty funny.
I don't know anything about that.
Oh, he's some kid on, I know he's on Instagram, and he basically just says a bunch of stupid things and puts a bunch of garbage that's sharp and painful if you were to fall on it, and then catapults himself off like a ladder or something and screams in pain. And I'm usually pretty amused by it.
I mean, I've shared my YouTube front page with you recently, and it was all wrestling, so I'm surprised I haven't seen any of that. I did watch, since the last time we spoke, UFC 300 happened. I don't know, did you catch any of UFC 300?
No, there was something else going on that night, and I don't remember what it was now, but I wasn't home. I didn't get to watch it.
It was, the last three fights, for sure, were amazing. They were like, they lived up to the hype. I was very skeptical that 300 would really be much different than the regular cards. You know, they always have a main event and like a co-main event.
That fight card was amazing.
The last, I didn't catch any of the prelim, I don't think, but all the main card stuff was pretty good, and the last three fights were great. Like the Max Holloway.
I think they had Holly Holm on the
undercard
prelims, and and she's always like a headliner. So the kind of for those who don't know,
I think her stock is kind of dropped.
She's usually the headliner on the ESPN Plus night anymore, but that's still a headlining spot. For those who aren't aware, Holly Holm is the second she's the one who basically ended Ronda Rousey's UFC career.
And John has a slight crush on her, because every time we talk about UFC and it's a female, Holly Holm gets brought up. So I'm reading between the lines here.
I mean, I'm not sure that I agree or disagree with that statement, but I'm not going to argue it either. So,
Anyhow, Justin Gaethje, Max Holloway fight was really like amazing. It was spoiler alert for a fight that happened weeks ago, but Max Holloway basically won on a last second knockout, like the literal last second of the match. You have a 5-round, 25-minute match. It was great. It's been so long, I can't remember who else fought. Like, I know the last three fights were great. I don't remember who they were at this point, because, things happen.
It's, blonde dude. Nunez? Was that who was one of the headliners?
Oh, Oliveira?
The main events? Or Oliveira, that's what it was.
Yeah, that was a good fight. And then there was another one. Whatever.
Wasn't that
it's in the
kid
past.
with the pink hair, Sean,
no.
Something? He didn't fight at that one? I thought he did.
No, now you're going to make me, we're just going to sit here and guess fights. Jesus Christ.
Ho-hum.
Yeah. I don't know.
Well, we don't need to do that.
Yeah.
It was a good one. I can go back. If I go back and watch it whenever it becomes free, it's not going to be a big, like, a loss.
No, that's a great, the whole main event is a great way to spend your time, especially if you're a UFC fan. So when it does become free, I would strongly advise towards watching it. Other than that, movie-wise, I watched a movie that said it was new to Netflix, but I think it's from 1986. It's called Firstborn. It stars Peter Weller, Terry Garr, Robert Downey Jr. is in it in a small role. Corey Haim's in it in a small role. Sarah Jessica Parker. There's like a lot of really like very young.
It's quite the cast.
Oh yeah, no, it's great. I mean, Peter Weller plays a dirt beat that moves into this family's home. Terry Garr's the mom, and it features a super amazing dirt bike track ride.
Did you just call him a dirt beat?
Did I? He's a deadbeat for sure. He could be a dirt beat.
He's a deadbeat dirt beat.
He's a dirt bag deadbeat. A deadbeat dirt bag. There you go. A dirt beat. It's a slight thriller.
Deadbeat dirt bike and dickhead.
There. Callback to Pumpkinhead.
I was gonna say
Dirt
that's a
bike and
callback for
dickheads.
those of you who are paying attention,
Including the kid, which I can't remember his name, but the kid that, yeah, I don't want to spoil it for a 1986 movie, but it's slightly thrilling. I was entertained, pretty entertained. Other than that, started watching the Fallout television show, which I've been hearing so much about for the last week or so. I think it's only been out at this point like a week and a half, and it's pretty good. 4 episodes in. I really like the games. I like the show, but the show is starting to feel, I haven't finished the season. It's 8 episodes on Amazon Prime. I haven't finished it, but it feels very much like it's one of those like, hey, remember this from the game kind of thing. And they'll show one little thing and somebody will mention some other, oh, hey, give me that stim pack, Brotherhood of Steel, power suit and all this stuff. So it's like, I don't know. Rad Roach, they'll show like a Rad Roach for like a scene. And that's, I'm supposed to get excited about a Rad Roach. It's cool. It's fun. I don't know how it'll end, but it's pretty good so far.
Do I need to start watching that? Or are we going to talk about that extensively? Because I've kind of been interested in that too, for the same reasons everyone's been like.
I mean, if you feel interested in watching it, watch it. And we'll talk about it we don't have to dedicate like a full thing to it, I don't think. Walton Goggins, he's great. He's great in everything.
I don't usually like him.
Really?
Yeah, he's my dislike for him goes all the way back to the show The Shield.
Love The
which
Shield.
Fucking hate that show.
Yeah,
and I
do
fucking
too.
hate him in it. And I've heard Steve Buscemi described this way too, but it doesn't bother me. He's got that like his teeth are all out for themselves, but his like mouth can't keep them in check type look to him, and it just really annoys me with him.
He's very toothy
for some reason, and that's a really shitty way to put it.
Are you familiar with Fallout, like as a kind of concept?
I played Fallout 2, Fallout 3, and New Vegas, I think. Was that the one Obsidian did?
Yeah.
So I didn't play, I think 4 was the last full release that I'm aware of. I don't know if there's anything after that.
So no big spoilers, but Walton Goggins plays a ghoul.
Okay.
So his teeth, I was like, how are they going to handle his teeth? Because ghouls are like these irradiated people that walk around. They're like kind of like zombies in a way, but they're alive. And I was like, how are they going to handle his teeth? Is he going to have these pearly whites through the whole thing? And there's still his teeth.
Sharpie him out.
They had him eat some dirt or something, eat some turds.
Right.
Yeah. So that's Fallout. And other than that, I just recently started. We had talked about it. We talked about it kind of off mic after the RoboCop episode, but there is I think it's on Freevee. There is a documentary, a TV, like a limited documentary series kind of thing. It's a 4-episode thing. They're about an hour and 15 minutes each, called RoboDoc. And it is basically a documentary on the creation of RoboCop. They have like all the people that you would want to hear from. They have Paul Verhoeven, they have the writer, they have Weller, they have Clarence Boddicker, whatever his name is, Yeardley Smith. No, that's not Yeardley Smith.
Red Foreman.
Yes, Red Foreman is in it. Just Ray Wise, like all the key players from the movie. Obviously, Miguel Ferrer isn't in there because he's no longer with us, but they have actually recordings of him. They show. I'm on the 2nd episode of that, and they show like how they did the effects of the squib guy, the guy that gets blown onto the table. And they said that they still think he has like the record for the most squibs ever as a person. Peter Weller talks about the squibs, and they talk about like when they create the puppet, the animatronic puppet for when Murphy gets shot in the head and like executed. Spoiler again for RoboCop. If you have not seen RoboCop, if you have seen RoboCop, go listen to our episode about RoboCop. We go into it pretty in depth. But yeah, that's another good one. I mean, I love behind the scenes stuff. I know that you do too. So if you're into RoboCop, I would highly suggest watching that. Again, I think it's like Tubi or Freevee. I guess I could probably look it up. It'll be linked in the show notes, as most stuff is that we talk about. But yeah, I mean, I had a bit of a whirlwind, and that's what I've been watching. What have you been up to there, big guy, Chief?
Fucking hate when people call me Chief.
Hey, boss. What have you been watching there?
I kind of went on quite a few things. So since you didn't do any, we'll just skip Wrestler's Corner altogether because I went through a little short marathon of some Dark Side of the Ring, but I won't go too much into that.
Okay.
Since you didn't do it. That way I'm not spending a half hour just talking about
I mean, I watched
wrestlers,
two of
some of which-
the two new episodes, but we can save it for next time.
I didn't watch new ones. I watched old ones.
Oh.
Fuck it. Let's do it.
Do it.
So
Ding, ding, ding.
I'll just rampage through the ones that I did watch. I watched Luna Vachon.
Mm-hmm. She licked your head.
She licked my head as a child. I don't know if that made it to the episode that we did last week because I haven't listened to it yet. You would know that, but whatever. I watched the Dark Side of the Ring on the Von Erichs because apparently I wasn't depressed enough in my life, so I had to get that side of the story. Which, frankly, the movie does a better job of engaging you in the story than the actual story is.
You mean of
I
the Dark
kept
Side of the
watching.
Ring show?
Yes,
I think the thing with that,
the movie.
you think the movie showed more than the show did, or vice versa?
I think the movie does a better job of getting you engaged and bought into the story and like kind of fleshing out the real tragedy in it. And it's not to say that the tragedy is not in the real or in the Dark Side of the Ring thing. It is, but it feels like, you know, the Dark Side of the Ring episode's what, 45 minutes, something like that. And I'm all for shortened to the point, but it feels like, you know, there's 25 minutes of just like, and then this guy died, and then this guy died, and then this guy died. It goes so quick through it
Yeah.
that you don't really get to process anything. Not that you're really processing it in the film because you're not living it, but you don't really feel the impact
Like
of
the
it, for the
gravity of
impact
it.
it has. Yeah, because it's just so quick how like fast they go through all of it, and then you know they move on to, was it Kevin Von Erich, the one that's still alive, or Kevin, right?
Yep.
You know, there's at least like 10 minutes of interlude of him just walking around shirtless, or not shirtless, shoeless,
Footless.
Wrong Von Erich.
Yeah. Nice
Walking
comeback.
around shoeless and climbing trees in Hawaii and stuff. I'm like, okay, that's cool. I'm glad that you found peace, but like, it's, you know, not as interesting.
I think the problem with that, like you mentioned, it's because it's 45 minutes, it's just not enough time to really give you depth
Yeah.
of what happened, whereas the movie is so focused. I mean, that's what the movie's about. So this episode is like, it feels like it could have been a two-parter, and they probably could have gone maybe a little bit more in depth.
Easily.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, and again, this is kind of the mantra of the show, but like we talk about something as long as we feel like it needs to be talked about. And with that episode, I don't feel like they went in depth as far as like should have to really cover the topic. But it does tell you more, like they tell you about the brother that's not in the movie at all. So that's good. They tell you a little bit more about the dad than they do in the movie, but not like a ton more about it. It's a good episode, but even though they leave an entire human being out of the movie, I feel like you get a lot more of the story from the movie than you do from the Dark Side of the Ring. And again, this is coming from someone who doesn't fully admits that he's by no means an expert on the story or the, you know, legend or whatever, but you feel it so much more in the movie than you do in this Dark Side of the Ring episode.
Yeah.
And I did the Gino Hernandez episode, which frankly, I don't remember which one that was after, but it just kind of rolled right into it. I was like, okay, I guess this is what we're doing. And this is also how I landed on the XPW episode, which
The XPW one's good. Gino Hernandez was the tag team partner of Chris Edwards, was he not? For a short amount of time? Gentleman Chris
I
Edwards.
believe so. Yeah, he got it. It's implied that he got mixed up in like cocaine and drugs and stuff, and someone killed him. And they don't flat out say it, but they kind of flat out imply it.
Do you remember what season that is?
It's like 3 or 4 or something like that.
Because they're on 5 now, right?
Yeah, I believe so. 5 or 6.
The one that most recently aired was the one about Chris Edwards, Gentleman Chris Edwards, who was the tag team partner of Gino Hernandez. And they kind of talk a little bit about it. So it's kind of, that's,
intertwined.
I mean, not cool, but it's kind of, it's neat
for sure.
that they kind of tie it together, I guess, a little bit.
And then, yeah, the XPW, I was not aware of the XPW at all.
Yeah,
like,
same.
That was not, I mean, as soon as they said what the XPW was, and basically the XPW is like wrestling and porn combined, is essentially what this is.
Rob Black, right?
Yes. And they took all the like super extreme shit that you see in like ECW, and they even like poach a couple counts, like what's this, New Jack or whatever, and stuff. They
Yeah,
took all the
wouldn't
like
surprise
really
me.
extreme stuff, Yeah, and they basically just peppered on a bunch of tits on top of it, as you do.
As you do.
And that's another one that I kind of felt like the 45 minutes that they give you in that episode just has to be barely scratching. I mean, they got a dude who has his fucking thumb cut off in this episode, and it's not a footnote, but it's almost a footnote
It's
because
a
you
thumb
know,
note.
like it is. You know, if you have stuff
here
like
all
that
week,
going
folks.
on, there's so much. Yes, and next week and the week after that, probably. There's just so much more that I would have loved for them to have gotten Rob Black on and have him really like tell some shit, but apparently he said no, probably because he would end up in prison.
Right.
So
Didn't want to implicate
but-
himself in anything.
yeah, but that was one that I was like, this feels like it could turn into a YouTube rabbit hole that I haven't started on yet.
Yeah, same. Maybe tonight's the night.
Probably not.
The nighttime is the right time.
So switching channels over to Tubi for a brief moment, I watched Transylvania 65,000.
Yeah,
not
there's
very
a
good.
song.
Yeah, it's a bad song.
Yeah,
It's
a song.
a bad movie. It is a song. It has a couple one-liners in it that kind of save the whole movie because they're so ridiculous. They're very gifable and like rim-shotable almost. But other than that, it's like Kramer being like goth Kramer inside of a Transylvania movie. And occasionally there's a monster. It's not very good, but it's free on Tubi. I did fall a little bit into Netflix documentary mode for like two things. I watched the Antisocial Network, which is a roughly like 2-hour documentary on 4chan, which I felt like I had seen before, but it said it was from this year. So if I did, I like flushed it out of my brain. But if you're familiar with 4chan, there's really nothing in this documentary that's going to surprise you. It's basically like, here's the cesspool of the internet. Let's make 2 hours about it. And that's kind of what it is. That's pretty much it. If you know what 4chan is, you kind of know what you're getting yourself into with this. And that's either, I don't know how good or bad that is. Have you seen that one or no?
No, I've seen it on Netflix on the list, and I'm like, gotta watch that. But it's one of those things where it's like, that's 2 hours. I mean, I'll probably end up watching it.
It's not bad. It's one of those that you don't really, at least for me, I don't feel like I really got anything out of it that I either didn't know or wouldn't have assumed, which is probably a shitty way to look at something that's trying to teach you something, but it's how I felt with it. I did tell you a little bit about me watching this series Unlocked that just came out on there, which is basically the concept of the show Oz, but in a real prison. And I say real because I don't know how real it is when you bring a bunch of camera crews in to a prison. Like, I feel like the prisoners might realize that there's a camera crew everywhere. So
Yeah, I was wondering how real, quote unquote, it is.
I forget the time frame of this like experiment that they do. It's 8 episodes. I want to say it's like 6 weeks. I feel like it's a weird number. Like, it's not like a solid month. It's like a month and a half or something like that
Mm-hmm.
that they cover. I don't know. Like, they start the series saying like these guys are on 23-1 as far as their like lockdown. So basically they're only out of their cell for an hour a day, which to me implies like this is probably a pretty shitty prison if they're keeping you locked down literally 23 hours a day. Like, they don't let people out to like roam and stab each other or anything. Like, how rude. So they basically give you like, hey, this is the concept of what we're doing. It's essentially like Oz, but they don't ever say that because, you know, it's probably copywritten. So they tell the prisoners, okay, we're going to let you out. Don't fuck up, whatever. And of course, like, bullshit happens, but there's only like, they go through like a period where they make a bunch of hooch, which looks god fucking awful. I don't know if you've ever seen like prison hooch like in any way, but it looks just fucking horrendous.
Only in the movies.
Yeah, well, I haven't seen it in real life, and I'm okay with that. I don't want to see it.
You should try and make your own.
Yeah, no, I'm good. I have a lot of hooch back there that is not of prison quality, and I aims to keep it that way. But that's entertaining enough just because I don't know why I always, whenever you put a camera crew in a prison, like, I'm probably going to watch it. It's moderately interesting to me, for better or worse.
Have you ever seen 60 Days In?
Yes. They did like 4 or 5 seasons. And the original warden or like head cop of that prison is in like major shit now.
Because of the show?
No, he was like embezzling money or something from the prison. So he's going to prison too. But yes, I did watch 60 Days In, and I enjoyed that show as well, even though I was like, man, these people got to know someone's a fucking narc in these prisons. So
just in case people out there haven't heard, 60 Days In is like a reality show where they put, what is it, like 4 or 5 people in a prison with the general
I think it's
population.
more than that. I think it's like 8. to start with, and they kind of weed them out.
Yeah, I think I've only seen the first season.
Yeah, and they kind of weed them out like through, like they'll, for the sake of argument, we'll just say 8 because that's the
Who
number
cares?
that's sticking in my head. And they introduce them into the prison population at different times with the intent of being able to get intel about how people are getting drugs in, who's getting stabbed, all that type of shit. And they don't put them all in at once. They kind of sprinkle new people in throughout the run of the season, and they also will take people out throughout the run of the season. So it's supposed to give the impression like they're regular inmates, I guess. And every year, like, you know, every season, they always end up like by episode 4 of 8, there's someone who's like, that motherfucker's a snitch. And, you know, it goes downhill from there. But I don't remember what they did in the first season. Eventually, they start bringing women in too to do like the women's side of the prison and stuff. But yeah, I used to.
They had women the first season.
Did they?
Mhm.
Okay. But yeah, back in the days when I had cable, I used to watch that pretty regular. It was on the recording list for the old DVR that used to be had, and don't know. So I don't even know that show. I doubt that show is still on.
As of 2023, it was in season 8.
Oh, well, then I'm gonna have to go find some seasons and catch up, apparently.
It's on Tubi.
There you go. The only other things I really watched worth talking about, and these were actually my 2 favorite things that I watched this week. I watched a short film by Robert Rodriguez, which I told you a little bit about, called Two Scoops. And for those who don't know, this is like a 12-minute film on Tubi, directed by Robert Rodriguez. It's got the 2 notorious babysitter twins from Planet Terror. They're also in Machete and probably any Rodriguez movie after. I think Planet Terror is the first one they show up in. But they're the main characters in this. And basically, this is a 12-minute, like, Robert Rodriguez fucking around and finding out with a green screen. It's like the whole purpose of this short film. And it's kind of amazing. In 12 minutes, he manages to kill off a few people, blow up some shit, and tell a cognitive story from start to end, while still playing like the trademark, like, Robert Rodriguez, like, action transition music, and having that, like, I say charm because I absolutely love Robert Rodriguez and his adult films. And by adult, I don't mean porn. I mean adult, like, R-rated movies.
Sure.
It's got the majority of it there for what you can do in 12 minutes. So I'm sure we'll link that. And that is 12 minutes that you won't be pissed about watching. It's a pretty fun one. Did you ever get around to watching that or no?
I did not.
You're
I'm a
lost.
horrible person.
You are a horrible person.
I know.
But
Thank
it's
you.
okay. I still love you.
Thanks, buddy.
But aside from our topic for the week, the thing that I found that I really enjoyed.
Spoiler.
So there is a documentary about a band called Dead Guy that came out in a few years back. And when it came out originally, it was on, like, you could only get it through their website, and it was moderately expensive, if I remember right, like more expensive than I wanted to pay. It's on YouTube now for free, as long as you don't mind watching a couple ads. It's called Dead Guy Killing Music, which is about their short, tumultuous, like, maybe 5-year career as a band. And they're a really weird, like, I used to love this band when I was a kid. They're like this weird, they're not quite metal, they're not quite a hardcore band, they're just this weird, guttural, borderline demonic sounding like shit show that's this perfect encapsulation of chaos, heaviness, and like almost torture, all in this like one sound. It's really, really unique. And to this day, with the exception of the band, so the band didn't really break up. Like, half the band split halfway through their run and went and formed a second band, and they sound a lot like Dead Guy. So aside from that, there's really nothing else that has this sound. And they've been doing like a couple reunion shows here and there. So I talked about driving to New York this summer to see him, just because I never got the chance to see him on their original run. I don't even know if they played in Detroit on their original run. That's how short they were there. But they're kind of one of those bands, like, if you're in that scene or if you know the bands from that genre, they're like a one of one. And there's so few bands that you can say that about. And there's so few bands that like leave that impression that they're just this little sonic boom of insanity. And then usually bands like that are so like fucked up to begin with. That's why they don't last, because they have emotional issues or some shit. But this does a really good job of going through basically their whole career all the way up to when they like finally get back together and like will not just punch each other the second they see each other. It plays a lot of clips of their music. You see a lot of like really raw 1996 like college town, like, I don't even know what kind of camera you would use at that point to record a band live. But the great thing about those is, like, as good and or bad at the same time as they probably sounded if you were in that little room where they were playing, trying to listen to it on this fucked up camera with no equalizer and none of that shit, it just sounds equally amazing and terrible at the same time. So it's a really cool, again, if you don't give a shit or have any interest in this band or don't like weird little one-off stories, I could see this being something you would look, why the fuck would you watch this? But if you like these weird little, you were talking about a band once that you watched a documentary of, I can't remember what it was, I want to say English band, that something about killing the KFM or some shit like that.
KLF.
Yeah. I never got around to watching that, but it's same type of vibe from when you were talking about that. Like, it sounded like something you were really interested in because they did a lot of really weird shit, and it was like they burned bright and then they were gone, and like either you know it or you don't. Think like that, but a different genre of music. So yeah, I really dug that.
I'll check that out.
Yeah, I really dug it. And again, I was a fan of the band, so that certainly helped for me, but that was, I wanted to see this since it came out, knowing about it, and just didn't want to pay for it because I'm cheap and shitty, and I've already given this band enough of my money by buying their albums and t-shirts. Yeah, it was definitely a really enjoyable way for me to spend an hour and a half, and played it loud because they had clips. Yeah. So hopefully we'll link that, because if we don't, that would be disappointing, but check that out.
We will definitely not link it. You'll have to check the show notes, though, to make sure that I didn't link it.
That's true. While you're checking the show notes, we're going to take a break. We'll be back, and we're going to talk about this week's topic, Late Night with the Devil. If you have a soft spot for nostalgia and all things pop culture related, then you need to check out Video Tasties on YouTube. You can find them at the You Run Podcast Network and also at youtube.com/@videotasties. Video Tasties features theatrical versus extended cut content, as well as retrospectives on TV shows, movies, video game reviews, and throwbacks. Basically, if it's anything from your past that you want to go back and relive, Video Tasties has a video for you that can let you do that.
And they're a member of the You Run Podcast Network. You can find them at yourunpodcast.com.
Okay, so we're back. We're going to talk about Late Night with the Devil, and when we talk about a movie, we start with a third-party review. We were going to feature our good friend Jordana from over at Pretty Killer Podcast, but the short version is we had some technical issues. She's the person who's responsible for really getting me hyped up for this movie. I was interested beforehand. She started talking about it, and then I really got interested, and then Sean told me to shut up. We'll watch it when we can watch it, and, here we are.
Something like that.
Yeah. Since we can't quote Jordana at the moment, we're going to quote Pat, who is maybe dumb, but Pat gave this movie 2 out of 5 stars. And Pat said, this movie spent too much time getting to the fucking point, then it was over. End review. Which I
just like the silence that sits there as we look at each other.
I just love this review because isn't that every movie?
No, not always. No. I mean, some movies more so than others. There are some that are like nonstop, just blowing your wig back constantly, and then some aren't.
I guess I feel like most movies, once they get to the point, that pretty much means that they're gone.
I took a little bit more, I don't know, interpretation of it took a long time to get there. We'll get into it.
All right. Sean, why don't you tell us what this movie is all about?
All right, so we head over to IMDb, where this movie is number 14 of a list of unknown amounts. It's up 21 spots. It says that we look at the storyline and the plot, obviously, at IMDb, because what else would you do there? I don't know which one's which, but we'll start with one. We think it's the plot, and it says, a live television broadcast in 1977 goes horribly wrong, unleashing evil into the nation's living rooms. If we head on down to the storyline, it says a little bit more. October 31st, 1977, Johnny Carson rival Jack Delroy hosts a syndicated talk show, Night Owls, that has long been a trusted companion to insomniacs around the country. A year after the tragic death of Jack's wife, ratings have plummeted. Desperate to turn his fortunes around, Jack plans a Halloween special like no other, unaware he's about to unleash evil into the living rooms of America.
Image Nation. I thought that said Imagination Nation. Would have been a better name.
Where are you seeing that?
That's who wrote the storyline.
Oh, Image. Okay, I'm like, what? Huh?
before we start breaking it down stuff, do you want to start with the cast on this? Because I always skip over that, and then you have to remind me we should talk about the cast.
Yeah, we can talk about the cast. This is a movie where it's like I've seen people and I feel like I recognize them, and then I look through their credits and I don't recognize any of the other stuff that they've been in. So the main character, Jack Delroy, the one that's mostly featured for, probably the majority of the movie, is played by
the lead for sure.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, other people would call it the lead. I would say the person that's featured in probably the most in the movie. That's like shorthand for the lead. David Dastmalchian, which John and I were just discussing how we actually say that guy's name. He's the main dude. I mostly remember him from, I think he was in a Batman movie, not the Batman, but a Batman. And he was
him from Inglourious Bastards.
Oh, okay.
That's where before this, he's one of the bastards in the movie. And this guy speaks Italian like third best or something.
Okay. He was in Dune. And he was in Suicide Squad. Suicide Squad's probably the one that he's Polka Dot Man. So that's the one you'd probably recognize him in the most. Other than that, there's Laura Gordon, who plays June Ross Mitchell, who is a psychiatrist in the movie that comes onto the show to help facilitate what happens later. We've got Ian Bliss, who plays Carmichael Haig, who is like the analog to the Amazing Randy, the real Amazing Randy.
He's actually based off a real character too.
The Amazing Randy.
Go ahead. No, I think it's a different guy because I found another little like video on the guy that he's based on. Maybe it's the Amazing Randy. Hold on, I'm trying to keep talking. I'm trying to find it.
All right. So also we have Rice Ateri, who plays Gus McConnell, who's like the Ed McMahon to Jack Delroy, and then Lily is played by Ingrid Torielli, which we were talking before the show. We're like, I think she's playing a 13-year-old. Lily's supposed to be 13, I believe, and she does not look like a 13-year-old. So we were trying, how old do you think she is? And I couldn't find it. But yeah, so that's the basic cast, like the main cast of characters that we see for a majority of the movie. And the movie, to kind of just give some context as to what it is about, is basically what we said in the storyline, the plot from IMDb. But the way that the movie is presented, it starts off at the beginning, kind of giving you the history of Jack Delroy and, his background and how he became this late night talk show host. And then the movie is played as if they tell you it's what went to air on television when this was broadcast. So you get behind the scenes stuff.
I'd say it's somewhere between a found footage movie and a mockumentary.
I don't know about found footage, but I could see that. So when they go to like commercial break, the movie is shown almost exclusively in 4:3, like in that aspect ratio. And then when it goes to commercial, they show these kind of black and white behind the scenes things that happen, and it's widescreen. It's 16:9. So it's kind of an interesting way to present the story. And the camera, when they cut to commercial, they go to black and white, the camera will kind of follow Jack as the host and him talking with his producer and, people off stage, people that are working crew, basically behind the scenes people. He'll interact with guests or whatever. So it's almost, you can almost think of it as kind of, it's supposed to be presented one take, but obviously it's not, because there's, it's cut between the show, the commercials, well, not the real commercials, but the commercial breaks and talking with the guests and stuff. So it's presented very interestingly. And I know that when I started watching it, that's one thing to me that really, at first I was like, is this just all going to be the show? Like, are they going to show anything besides just like a talk show that would last an hour and a half? I think late night used to be an hour and a half, like back in Johnny Carson days. So I was kind of happy to see that they have that behind the scenes thing. But you kind of talked about it. I wanted to ask you about the hype. You had talked about it a little earlier, saying you kind of got hyped up by what you had seen or heard. Do you think the hype had any influence over your opinion of the movie? You don't have to get the specifics, but I'm just curious, because I had heard about this movie and seen stuff about it, but just didn't watch any of it, and knew it was coming out, didn't know when it came out, heard a lot of buzz about it, and didn't know anything about it.
So can I put a pause on that for a second? Because you mentioned something that I want to talk about before we forget about it, being the aspect ratio and how they play with that in here. Normally in movies, like I'd say 99% of movies, when they do that shit where they fuck with aspect ratio for whatever reason, it almost always is something that annoys me. I don't normally like it. With this movie, it is fucking masterful. like it really does a good job of not only taking the 4:3 ratio and kind of showing it in the aspect that you would see a TV show from the 70s. They also, I'm sure it's just like a filter they're putting in post because that makes sense, but they do a really good job of kind of almost downgrading the quality of the picture. They give this like really sepia tone wash over everything, so it has this kind of vintage look to it when they're doing that, and then taking the aspect ratio and moving it to, you know, the widescreen view just does a really good job of letting you know where you're at in the story without actually saying like this is behind the scenes, this is the actual show that supposedly happened. And then I like, although I will have more comments about the end of this movie, I like how there's a point in the movie where it's almost like the white switch changes and you're seeing things from a third point of view, which is not the behind the scenes stuff and not the stuff that was on the TV where it's full HD and it looks like something that was shot, you know, in modern day, which I have mixed opinions about that. But again, we'll get to that once we get to the point where we can talk a little more in depth about plot and what happens in this movie.
And just to kind of throw it out there, because we haven't mentioned, spoiler alert, this movie just hit streaming as of the time of this recording, like days ago.
2 days ago.
So
yeah.
we're going to do our best to refrain from spoilers, but be warned, we will not give this warning again.
Yeah, because I do want to actually talk a little bit about some of the stuff that happens in this, just because of
I feel like
what I took away from the movie. Yeah,
because
and I honestly, I feel like this movie earned it. This movie is, well, we'll come back to that. So let me answer your question about the hype train and all that stuff.
All right.
So I did not watch the trailer for this movie, which I know is supposedly this has a really cool trailer. I don't care. I find most of the time I'm either going to look at the poster and be interested, or I'm going to listen to people whose opinions I trust, and like that will get me interested in a movie. In this case, it was both. Like I absolutely love all the artwork that went into this movie, all the posters. And I know there's like some shit about the AI that might not have been used for some of the things. I really don't care right now. Like it works for what's in this movie. This movie this movie actually came out last year. It kind of hit the film festival circuit for a little bit, and then it has been showing in theaters around here, but it's like super limited. And basically, unless you want to go to the movie at like 11:30 at night on a Tuesday, which sounds good in theory, except some of us have to work on Wednesday, you know, so that kind of sucks. It wasn't as easy to see. So what's interesting about this, as far as the hype train that we're referring to, is this is the only movie I can think of in a really long time that I've yet to hear a person whose opinion I actually give a shit about say something really negative about this movie. It was almost unanimous. Like I've only heard good things about it. And that's kind of what's been, for the most part, the momentum behind this movie. So it's got a lot of word of mouth behind it and a lot of buzz behind it from we'll call it the horror community online and whoever you talk to. And regardless of what we're about to say and how we feel about this movie, I know there's one movie that was some BBC like TV movie that came out that I guess is a very similar concept to this, but this feels like a very unique film. I haven't seen this. The BBC movie is called Ghost. I wrote it down. Ghost Watch. It came out in 1992, and I guess it's about some paranormal shit that happens on the TV show. And it looks like they made some sequels of it too, but I had not even heard about that until today, like leading up to us talking about this. This felt extremely different to me for a movie. And much like we were talking about with the band Dead Guy, like if you could do something that feels unique and like you have a voice that sticks out, like you're not just making Scream 8 or something like that. You're making something that is a very different vibe and a different feel. And that really does draw you into this movie very well. Whether you like it or not is a different conversation. But I think this movie, because it feels fresh in comparison to what we've seen, at least in the last 30 years, I think that's a huge vote of confidence to me for this movie. And that's a big part of why I was interested in it. If you are like following a lot of accounts like I do that have like horror movie talk and all that type of shit on it, this movie's been blowing up your like feed for 3 days now without question. And really for the last like 3 months or so. I don't know how you're avoiding knowing this movie is out at this point. So it does it doesn't have a big advertising budget behind it. Like, you're not seeing trailers for this on TV, I'm sure. Not that I would know. I don't have cable right now. You know, I feel like you'd have to seek this out a little bit, but it definitely has kind of that old school word of mouth buzz that I don't feel like we get with a ton of movies anymore. And when we do, it almost feels like it comes out in little like subsects of the horror community. Like, you have the clown people that are really excited for Terrifier 3, or you have
fucking
the
clown
Halloween
people, man.
right? Or you have the Halloween people who won't shut up about Halloween Ends that are still talking about it 2 years after it came out. That type of shit. This movie seems like it's getting a little bit of buzz from the horror community as a whole, as opposed to just like some people, which is different.
I gotta say, we talked about just a couple days ago, like, hey, if this movie comes out before we record, we should talk about this movie because it was one that you were highly anticipating and I had heard good things about, so I wanted to watch it too. And since it hit streaming, the reason I asked about the hype train thing is that, like, I haven't read anything, but you'll look on your Google feed or you'll look on Apple News or whatever, and it has been constant. You just like have to scroll through stuff like, nope, don't want to see that one, don't want to look at that headline, don't want to read that thing. I haven't seen, obviously when a big blockbuster comes out, like a Dune 2 comes out, you'll see, oh, hey, actually thinking back on it, I didn't really see that much about Dune 2, which I'm excited to watch, but this movie had so much, like, just things, and I'm very much like anti-trailer guy. Like, I think trailers are great if you're
more so than me.
Yeah.
I will watch a trailer if I don't know anything about the movie at all.
And I will not.
Right. But I've also said, and I know you agree with this, like, again, we'll use Scream as the example, like, oh, it's Scream 6. I better watch the trailer. Like, motherfucker, there's 6 of these movies right now. If you don't know if you're going to see Scream 6, regardless of what's in that trailer, you're a fucking idiot. Like, before that trailer is even there. Like, don't act like you either like Scream and you're going to see it, or you hate Scream and you're not going to see it, or you hate Scream and you're going to hate watch it. There's no fourth option, Anyway,
I was just
trailers.
Yeah, just saw so much lately about this movie that it was like, okay. And I have to say, when sometimes, and we talked about this last week when we talked to Sam and Jordana, we talked about it with Scream, actually. So it's coincidence that you brought it up. Scream was such a culture, and I don't want to rehash the Scream thing, but like Scream was such a cultural touchstone that so many people talked about it that I didn't watch much more than 2. I've never seen any of the other Screams besides Scream 1 and 2. And it was more like, it was like an anti-hate watch. It was a hate anti-watch.
Hate boycott.
Right, where I've heard so much about this, just shut the fuck up about this movie, and I don't want to hear about it anymore, and I'm not going to watch it because I'm just over it. So I'm glad that, number one, that we watched it when it came out, and number two, that we got it in, like, ahead of everything, just talking so much, just all the hubbub and the chatter about it.
Well, and I like that too, because, on Friday when this movie hit streaming, and I know this now, I didn't know this at the time, but there are, won't go as far to say major plot points, but there's big things that happen that are visually interesting, like some of the big practical effects scenes. I'm very happy about the fact that I saw those in the movie first, before I saw it in GIF form on Twitter. I get, like, if this movie has been out for 6 months, GIF it up, put it all over the place, whatever. You had 6 months to watch it, you didn't see it by now, that's on you. But when it's been out for 24 hours, like, dude, let me watch the fucking movie before. Like, some of us can't, like, watch a movie at 8:00 in the morning on Friday. Like, sorry, I wish I could.
Midnight or whatever on Thursday night.
If you haven't seen this movie, like, and you either are seeing these, like, clips or GIFs or whatever, and it ruins it for you, I'm sorry that someone's ruined this shit for you. That sucks. Hopefully you're just seeing the weird shit that happens in this movie and not knowing what it is and saying, what the hell movie is that? And keep scrolling, because I guess I won't know because I've already seen it at this point, but it is way more I'm sure way more satisfying to go into this movie with as blank a slate as possible.
Don't get me wrong, I love being able to watch first-run movies at home and not have to go to the theater if I don't have time to do that. And then I can watch it at home. If I have to take a shit, I can go do that. If I want to get a snack, I can go do that. But the one-upsmanship of coming out and being the first person to talk about it, I mean, are we kind of doing the same thing? Sure. But the movie just came out. Like there'll be a week there'll be a week and a half between the time that the movie came out and the time that this podcast is going to go up, that it's had room to breathe.
Well, and this is also partially, we have 3 movies that were voted on by our listeners that they didn't know this when they voted on it, but they're going to be coming out in succession pretty quick here. And we both agree that this is getting bumped in front of the line, because I'm going to go ahead and blame myself. Like this is my most anticipated movie this year. I don't know if you feel the same way about that or not, but this is the only movie that I have a strong, like, there's obviously other movies that will come out this year that I'm like, yeah, okay, I'll watch that. But this is the only one that I'm like, no, looks like it's something cool and that I actually want to watch, not just watching because I don't want to say I feel obligated to, but because what else am I going to do? Watch fucking documentaries about bands that have been broken up for 30 fucking years
that no one knows but you and like 10 other people.
Exactly. So the 10 people that were in their basement.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that this was a movie that it's something that I wanted to watch, and I don't know. I'll scroll through Apple News and I'll find stuff on, I don't know if it's Collider or one of those. There's so much shit that just mushed together on those aggregation sites or apps or whatever. I don't know where I saw it, to be honest, but I saw a thing and people were talking positively about it without really saying much about what the movie was about. And we really still haven't said all that much about it, but it wasn't like a highly anticipated thing, but I was like, oh yeah, I've heard good things about that. Yeah. When you brought it up, I was like, yeah, well, sure. Of course. We'll give it a shot. It's new and, we'll give it a rip. Why not? We don't talk about new movies all that often.
Yeah. We're not very good at that. New to us is like 1994.
Hey, so if you don't like it,
shit's like that. So we're coming up on movie runtime, so we might as well start talking about this movie at some point. This is where your real spoiler warning comes in. So did you find things that you really liked in this one, or were there things that let's start with that. What are some of the positives that you took away from this?
We're going to start with positives.
Let's start with positives.
I wrote a specific note about it. I really like when they do things where there are these like hidden visuals that happen that you're not quite sure if you see it when they happen. So I'm talking like when Lily is talking with Mr. Wriggles. Is that what his name is? Mr. Wriggles. And
something like that.
She's looking at June and there's a face that like shows up on the side of her head. And I was like, I think I saw something. I had the luxury because I was watching it at home, a copy of it. I wasn't at the movie theater. I couldn't have done this at the movie theater. I could skip back a couple seconds and be like, oh yeah, okay, I saw that. There's a scene where they bring out there's all these artifacts on a tray. There's like the dagger, the half the skull. There's some other thing. I don't remember what all they are, and there's like a little orb, like a glass crystal ball, basically, for lack of a better term. And there's one of the scenes during June, brings this possession out in Lily, essentially. And on the table, that crystal ball is sitting there. And most of the movie, it's black. It's like pitch black. But there's a scene where there's like a face in it or a profile or something that I didn't rewind that part, but I was like,
I'm going to have to go back and watch that again.
Yeah, I was like, oh, okay, I see there's a face and it's during the possession part. I really enjoyed that part. I like the practical effects. I thought the practical effects really worked. I don't want to jump into it yet, but I really, really, without talking about what it is, I really enjoyed the final 20 minutes of this movie. And again, without really getting into it, the reason that I liked it is because these are the types of endings of movies that I really enjoy. It's one of those kind of, without being super what the fuck, you can really piece together what happened, right? It's not totally obscure and you're just totally clueless and you're left bewildered at the end of the movie. What? It's not that. They very much build the story into it. They make it logical where they could have just made it some crazy fucking batshit thing, but it plays very logically. And I love movies. We've talked about it. This. When the ending comes and you're like, what the fuck just happened? But there's an explanation. That's great. That's my favorite kind of movie ending.
They give you just enough breadcrumbs.
Yes.
Leading up to the ending that you can piece it. Have you watched it a second time or no?
I haven't. No, I just watched it the one time.
So for me, I actually, and I haven't done this in a long time, but I watched this on Friday night. And then on Saturday morning, I watched it again, not because I felt like I didn't know what was going on, but because I just wanted to watch it again.
Yeah, you wanted to see what happened.
Yeah, it's very rare that I'll go back and actually start a movie up again that quick. Not there's some that I've done it for this show. I can't think of one off the top of my head where I'm like, what the hell did I just watch? And I kind of have to go back and like rehash it. This was more like, I just want to see this again. So that's a different vibe. To piggyback on what you said about the little things that you notice in the different parts of this movie, one of the things that I really liked, aside from the aspect ratio that we already mentioned, the movie does this thing. It's similar to what they did in Grindhouse, the movie. I'm sure it's in other Grindhouse films too, but they have this thing where you know something's about to happen, where there'll be this little static interference, and it's very brief and very small. And it almost looks like, here's going to go dating myself for a second, but it almost looks like the V-hold just slips just for a second on a like old TV. And you know, if you don't know what V-hold is, you probably are
youngin'.
That's a conversation for a different podcast. But there'll be like this little like static line that will like whip through on just like that, like real quick on the screen. And sometimes something will happen that's like super small and like in the background, like you were saying, when I noticed the face on the whatever her name is, Judy,
Lily,
sure,
the girl,
June, that's her name,
or the psychiatrist,
the doctor.
Oh, okay,
yeah,
sorry, I thought you were talking about the girl.
No, Lily. Well, anyway, like little things like that, like you'll see this little blip in the screen before something fucked up starts to happen, almost like a way of, I mean, this movie's about like summoning a demon, essentially.
Yeah, on live
what
TV.
This movie's about. Yeah, and it's almost like you can see through multiple people where this demon's showing up to the show, and he or she, they, I don't know, are demons progressive when it comes to gender? I don't know.
I'm not quite sure.
When the demon shows up, for the majority of the show, it's these little like teases of what's going to happen and it's building up, and it does a really good job of building this like tension. Might not be the right word. And I don't think this movie is like a terrifying movie. Like it's not gonna, I don't think this is the kind of movie like that's going to keep you on the edge of your seat, like in Terror, but it's got this really uneasy feeling through the majority of the movie, at least the first time you watch it, that you kind of feel like you know something fucked up is going to happen, but it's hard to place exactly when it's going to happen. And sometimes it's a little blip of a fuck up and something like being weird or crazy, and sometimes it goes balls out crazy. So I like how it builds and kind of balances between those. I'm sure there's more significance to it, but I really like the Halloween 3 looking dude that's in the audience, the skeleton dude, and the devil that's in the audience, the two like audience members that really stick out in the crowd and never seem to move through the whole movie. They just kind of like, I know the first time I watched it, I'm kind of, every time they pan to the crowd, I'm watching those two people, like expecting them to do something, and they have a cool look to them. Like they have that very 1970s looking Halloween costume, which is like a whole different kind of creepy than the shit we get now. And yeah, as from a story and a narrative perspective, I love the end of this movie. I think the way this movie wraps up and ends is really cool. And there's a lot of good things that happen in the last like 15, 20 minutes of this movie. When we get into our negatives, there's also going to be something I'll bring up there, but we'll get to that probably pretty soon. In fact, let's go ahead and roll into that now. So when it comes to my only real gripe with this movie for me, because I did love the practical effects, like you said, when they do practical effects in this movie, they look fantastic. They don't look believable, but they don't need to look believable.
Yeah.
They look fun, and they got that very, I know this is supposed to take place in the 70s, but they kind of got that like cheap 80s aesthetic, which we're both fans of. If you've listened to the show, you probably know that. Where I don't want to go as far to say it loses me, but what I was not a big fan of, I'm not talking about the little zaps of electricity that go throughout the crowd. Like I can kind of turn a blind eye to that. In the third act, it goes CG heavy for maybe like 3 minutes of screen time or so. And that felt, one, I don't like the look of the CG that they use. I think it looks very like early 2000s video game CG.
Yeah, like amateur.
Yeah, and it feels so out of place for everything else that's happened in the movie. Again, it's not enough to like turn my opinion on the movie as a whole, but it just looks odd. And I'm sure it was a budgetary choice why they did it. Like,
yeah,
that would be my guess. But I don't know. Again, I don't know the budget on this movie. I don't know where that money went to. That's a whole different thing that we're not going to look for answers for, because we don't do that kind of research.
You weren't signing the checks.
Exactly. That's really my only gripe, is there's a short period of CG, and there's some good practical effects mixed in with the CG at the same time, or practical enough. The CG is the only thing that really kind of sucks to me in this movie.
Yeah, I think the There are parts, the practical effects, like I said, I really enjoyed them. There's not enough of it, basically. It's like one
Absolutely.
specific section where one person, and they have this, like you said, it doesn't, you can
I'd
tell.
say there's two.
Is there two? Oh, okay. There's, one.
Because there's
Yeah.
the scene, I won't tell you what happens in, but there's a scene with Lily and there's a scene with Gus.
Okay.
That are both really well done.
I'm thinking more of the Gus section. That's
Yeah.
the one that really stuck out. And
Oh, yeah, for sure.
that specific part, the Gus part, has this, like, it reminds me of The Thing, when the head like separates from the body and it's kind of, it's like grows the legs and it's scurrying around. That's very like it very reminiscent of that. It looks like that sweaty, pasty kind of look. I think that big negative, well, there's one thing I wanted to point out that's not really a negative, but this movie I think has the most like production title sequences before the movie starts of any movie I've ever seen. there's at least like 8 or 10 of them.
I thought it was a joke at first.
Yeah, I did too. I was like, are they just, and then I thought like, it'd be hilarious if they just kept going. Like they did one for the actual show. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's like 20 minutes of just these production house credit title scene things.
That's a little annoying too, but
I think that's just this day and age, like getting shit funded.
Yeah. And that's really not part of the movie. That's just something you have
it's just a little complaint. The thing,
it is noticeable though, for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot. The thing also for me that I really was a negative for me is that the movie takes a long time, I feel, to really get going. Like, I don't like, it feels authentic to the time, like Jack, the character Jack, just the little cheesy jokes that he tells. It feels very like Dick Cavett of the 70s, kind of the smart man's late night talk show host, I guess. So they're very cheesy jokes, very like almost dad joke, kind of stuff, territory, I guess, dad joke territory. But the movie takes a long time for me to really start going. There's no real tension. There's no time when I felt like horror, so to speak, quote unquote horror. Like I didn't ever feel scared. I'm just like watching this thing. So I didn't really feel any tension throughout the movie. I've seen or heard other people say, I love the way that builds tension. I don't feel like there's really any tension. Like there's conflict for sure. There's conflict between the characters. There's conflict with the demon. But if it weren't for the way that this movie ended, I would have not even given it close to the rating that I'm going to give it.
I stand by. I don't think tension is the right word, but I do think it feels
it's like an unease or something.
A lot of it. And I know you and I have talked about this both on mic and off mic, but did you like late night shows when that was? I'm not talking about like the current era with Fallon and Kimmel and stuff, because I feel like those you can basically watch in YouTube clip.
Yeah.
Like it's not the same
They're
vibe
just YouTube
at all.
clip machines.
Yeah, but did you like before if you like it now, that's fine too. But did you get into late night shows? Because like I was a big fan of late night shows for really up through Conan O'Brien's run, and that's when I fell off. Is like when he started doing I think he bumped it down to like a half-hour show with just like he changed the format of the show right before he stopped, and that's about when I stopped watching it. But I would watch Conan's show even when he was on TBS most nights.
I never watched it on TBS, but I watched like late night when I was a little kid. Go story time real quick. Like when summer would come, I would stay up as late as possible, and my mom would be like, "I'm going to bed," whatever. I wanted to watch Three Stooges, and that would come out at 2:30, 2 or 2:30 in the morning on Channel 20 or I think it was Channel 20.
It came on about the same time that Batman 60 whatever came on, because I would
flip back and forth
between the two. Yeah.
There's something very uneasy, like very unsettling about the title card that they would show for Three Stooges. But I would watch like late night. The Late Show or whatever, Tonight Show. Duh. I'd watch the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. I didn't know who any of the people were. It was just like, oh, I'm up late, I'm going to watch this. Up until college, when I was in college, like Conan was really starting to hit his stride. So I watched a lot of Conan because I'm just a late night, like a night owl, basically. Like I'm up late most nights. But no, I'm not. Nowadays, I don't watch them because, like we just said, they're kind of like YouTube clip machines. You can watch whatever's interesting on the thing. I do watch Seth Meyers occasionally, though.
I haven't watched much of him, but so for me, because I used to watch so my routine every night for fucking years was I'd watch Letterman, then I'd switch over and watch Conan, and then eventually Conan moved up to 11 o'clock or 11:30, whatever it was, and I'd watch Conan, and then I don't remember what it was after, but I always really liked the late night show and that whole format, and I kind of miss it being something that was worth watching. It's not really appointment television anymore because of, like we already said. So for me, part of what I really like about this movie is it gives me that nostalgia vibe
Sure.
of the late night television show. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that are finding this movie that have no fucking idea what late night television is.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Like, and that's not necessary. It's just like, I'm sure there's a lot of people who don't know what, but we'll probably get like some version of this that's like a Jerry Springer show, because what do we do with popular movies? We remake them as other things.
Sure.
But a big thing that worked for me with this is that it's so much like set in this late night setting. I found that really enjoyable just because I spent so much of my youth watching late night television.
The other you kind of touched on it earlier, but the title cards, like in between when they cut to commercial, those are AI, right? They're like Midjourney.
I don't know if it's all of them or just some of them, but
they have that very
supposedly
that look
controversial.
Yeah.
Yeah. And honestly, like, again, I don't know what the budget is for this movie. I'm assuming it's not a ton because we mentioned the effects are kind of few and far between. Like, it's
very much a character drama kind of story. I mean, it's very character driven.
And whatever they put their budget to in the effects, at least for the practical stuff, they nailed it. But if we got the scene with Gus, which we're not going to go into because I don't want to ruin it for someone who hasn't seen this movie yet, if getting the scene with Gus, with what happens to him, means that we have to deal with a couple AI title cards with it.
Sure.
Big deal.
I
can live with that.
Yeah.
And I understand the whole argument of, oh, it's taking someone's job. Well, you're not going to stop it. What else do we want to hit on? Do we have a lot that we want? I mean, I feel like we've been talking. I'm just looking at the timer on here, and that's why I feel like we've been talking about it. I also feel like we haven't said a whole ton about this movie.
I think we've kind of said enough that it still leaves it open-ended. Some characters I really don't like. I think the other thing, I don't like the producer guy, like the behind the scenes guy. He just comes across as like a caricature of something.
My biggest problem with him is I kept thinking he was Hyde from that 70s show, and I know he's in jail now.
Yeah.
And
right. Danny
that
Masterson.
really threw me. Yeah, him. That really threw me off because I was like, I fucking hate that guy now because, he's a dick.
Because he has curly hair.
And it's not him. Both times I watched it, I looked it up. I'm like, no, it's definitely not him. Why? But still, fuck this guy. But he just doesn't add a whole lot. I guess the good thing is, like, and I've heard someone say this, like, it really shows like the chaoticness of behind the scenes in a television show. I'm like, I guess I've never been on a live television show.
Can't
but
really say that's what it is. It doesn't even seem that chaotic, to be honest.
No,
it's impressive, all the moving pieces and everything, but it's not all that chaotic.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with the idea of that character. I feel like casting someone else, or at least making him look different, might have gone a long way.
Yeah, I just think the guy. I think the character is Leo Fisk. I think is that character. He's just very wooden. I don't know. That's a minor complaint. The other thing is, like, I don't like when movies. I know that it's a likeness, So the guy Carmichael Haig, Carr, as they call him, Carr the whole time, is like super.
You're right about the
Amazing Randy, James Randi. He's like the super analog to that. I understand that guy is a real person, so they probably can't use his name. I don't like that in movies where they base somebody that's so like hardcore. It's clearly this guy, And the other part is like the Xander Diabo. Like, we know that's Anton LaVey, like Sandor Anton LaVey. Yeah. We know that's who that's supposed to be. And again, public figure.
We know the Grove is supposed to be the Bohemian Grove and all, like, and again, if you're not familiar with Anton LaVey or the Bohemian Grove, those are two wonderful rabbit holes to fall into, and you can do your own like research on that. But both those are
we need to do an episode on all
fascinating.
These things, all this occult shit.
They're both extremely fascinating, and not what we're talking about so much on this episode.
That just rubs me the wrong way. I'm not a fan of when they just name things. They can't use the names. I understand why they do it. It just, to me, comes across as kind of cheesy. Like, just make them a little bit different and call them. Don't go so close to, like, especially the Xandor Diabo. Like, that is so on the nose that it's criminal.
It is, but at the same time, so Carmichael Haig or whatever, his character is like a major part of the movie. Like, he's in the majority of this movie. So that's a different conversation. But the Bohemian Grove and the Anton LaVey thing, like, those are so like lightly used and mentioned in the movie. You mentioned earlier with what happens at the end of this movie, like and I said there's just enough of a breadcrumb to kind of get you from the beginning to the end and kind of tie it all together. That's why in this particular movie, why it doesn't bother me, because it's kind of
integral.
mentioned.
Yeah,
it's integral, but it's also like a very footnote to it that almost like you blink and you miss it type thing. What time is it, Sean?
Then you're in for a big treat, bro, because it's hot dog time.
So we kind of touched on it throughout. Like, this shouldn't be any big surprise what I'm about to say, but I didn't hype myself up for the movie. I had a rough idea of what it was, and when it started, I even thought to myself, like, as the movie goes, it's all this late night talk show. I thought to myself, this is what I keep seeing everybody talk about. There's not a whole lot that happens, especially very early on. You just kind of get the backstory and all that stuff. But as it went on, it started to get more interesting. It starts to add a little bit more of this like unease. It starts to get a little bit more real instead of just being an interpretation of what a 70s kind of cheesy late night talk show would be. The movie does get better as it goes along. I was happy that it didn't just continue on this like plot, for lack of a better term, of just being, this creepy thing happens. Okay. Like I said, the last 20 minutes were by far my favorite part of the movie. This could be a half-hour movie, to be perfectly honest, and I would be okay with it. Like, you could give me 10 minutes, give me the Cliff Notes version of the entire story. We'll just do the last 20 minutes, have that still be the same thing. Like I said, I thought at the beginning, where is this going to go? How is it going to end? But at the end of the day, I really do like that the movie made you question what was actually happening. The ending 100% saved the whole thing for me. If the ending was different, I would have dropped this rating like multiple points. These are the types of stories that I love. I love ones that give you curveballs. I love curveballs in my horror movies. I got to give this 7.5 fourth wall breaking looks at the audience out of 11 hot dogs.
I find anymore when I look forward to a movie, when I find something that I'm excited about, more often than not, my expectations betray me and I'm disappointed. That's not the case with this movie. I would be thoroughly surprised if I like a movie that comes out in 2024 more than this. I really enjoyed pretty much everything about this. The character of Jack Delroy, to me, is acted out almost flawlessly. Like, I really don't have any negatives about the performance. I'll disagree. Like, I think the pacing in this movie is really well done. Like, and that might just be me really liking the late night talk show aesthetic of it and how it kind of builds up through the story, how they're choosing to tell this story. I really enjoyed it. I love the look of this movie, the vibe of it, just top to bottom. Like I said, with the exception of the CG, I don't really have a whole ton of negatives to say. Again, this was already something that I've rewatched once, so I can guarantee you I'll be going back to it repeatedly throughout the years. This is a really solid 8 satanic demonic entity wieners out of 10 for me. Like, I thoroughly feel like this movie to me lives up to the hype. It doesn't oversell or undersell anything, and I would have been very glad to have paid to see this in a theater had it been available for me to see at a reasonable time. So yeah, this is a fun one, and this is a movie that actually deserves some of the buzz that it's getting. And I hope, if you're listening to this, that you watch this movie before we or anyone else ruins it for you. And I don't think we ruined it.
I think we kind of skirted enough around as much as we could.
Right. So
Excuse me. What about my rating?
what is your rating, demonic entity of the show?
Well, this was a movie just kind of after my heart. I kind of related quite a bit with the devil character, the demon kind of dude that was, going around and doing the things with the stuff. So I got to say, for me, like 10 out of 10 for sure.
Can I ask you a question, Mr. Demonic Entity of the show?
What's up?
As a demon, does like urination burn? Is that like a thing? Or is it like gonorrhea 24/7? Or is it like no big deal?
When I don't have gonorrhea, that's when it really burns.
That's when it really, okay. So gonorrhea kind of chills it out?
Yeah, that's normal,
Makes sense.
It's kind of like, when you're used to being sounded all the time and it doesn't happen, it just kind of feels weird.
Fair enough. Would you like to hear us do question of the week, Mr. Demonic Entity?
Yeah, why not? Let's roll into that.
Dewey Demonic, whatever you are. What's the demon's name in this movie? Vargo?
The Dewey Demonic System.
There we go. It's like taunt you and tell you where your book is located.
Yeah.
So,
demon, get out of here. Back to wherever you came from.
all right. Question of the week as we sidetrack and drag this one out. We actually got a lot of responses on this, so I'm going to start on the platforms where we didn't get a bunch, and then we'll just rattle off all the Twitter ones. So our question of the week is pretty straight and to the point. Who is your favorite late night host from past or present?
Did we just get a lot of people that said Conan?
We had a lot of people that said Conan, but there's some other answers. There's a lot of other answers.
Oh, cool. Good.
So over on Facebook, we start with our friend John, the Not Me John, who says, for me, it's Conan and Craig Ferguson. Craig Ferguson was a great late night show. He had the misfortune of being in a time slot against Conan for a long run, but
the old Craig Kilborn slot.
It was Craig Ferguson. Is it Craig, or was Craig Kilborn the one
I'm
that
saying
came after?
Ferguson took over for Kilborn, but they had, it was the same show. I mean, it was the same slot.
Right. So I don't know which Craig he's referring to, but I'm going to assume that's Craig Ferguson because that's the
I would
one
think
that
so.
like
I think
more,
Craig Kilborn was on for such a short time. Like that was a real flash in the pan kind of thing.
It's like a year or two, wasn't it?
Yeah, maybe a year and a half, 2 years.
Over on Instagram, so Horror Hockey Forever just says David Letterman, which is fucking iconic.
Mount Rushmore.
He interviewed Jerry. I mean, he bumped Jerry because Jerry got bumped from a fucking school assembly. But yeah. And then we go over to Twitter, X, Hardcore, or whatever, where a whole bunch of people responded. So I'm going to go through these a little quicker. Sinister Scoop, who is at Sinister Scoop 6, they are also members of the You Run Podcast Network, said, totally Jon Stewart, but also, can I say Jack Del Roy? And I said, you say whatever you want, even if they're fictitious.
This is our show. You can't say whatever you want, but we'll allow it this time.
Our friends over at Podcast in the Woods, who is at Woods Podcast 1, Boomer said, I don't know if it counts, but can I say Joe Bob Briggs? Does that count?
I think that counts. Chuck it up.
I think it counts too. He was a late night show. He wasn't standard, but
I don't have a ding, but you know, if we want it to count, I could use chimes instead.
There we go.
All right.
He's referring mostly to Monster Vision over on TNT, like goes on for a while. And I loved Monster Vision as a kid. I don't know if you did.
I didn't have cable.
We've brought Joe Bob up, I don't know how many times. If you don't know who Joe Bob Briggs is, kind of wonder how you found our show. But in fact, if you don't know who Joe Bob Briggs is and you found our show, let us know. Be interested. Be Afraid _horror says Conan easily. Friends over the Krusty Boys, you gonna eat that crust? You Run Podcast members, they say easily Conan. Like David Letterman more now than I did when he had his own late night show. Mr. Crow, who is at Time Simpler, said Conan by a long shot. Pearl, who is at Hissy Face X, says Late Night with Butthead, duh. Which
hey, it's hard to argue.
the only thing better than that might be Beavis being Paul. Late Night with Butthead.
Come to Butthead.
It is hard to argue, especially since Butthead spent so much time with the tapping his pencil.
That was you tapping a pencil, right?
Well, a pen, but yeah, I don't have a pencil down here. At Will Hughes says Carson, of course, but more recently I go with Craig Ferguson, who caused me to laugh out loud several times. I don't remember Carson Daly's late night show. I know it was on, but I don't know if I ever actually watched it. Did you?
Yeah, I didn't. I can't say that I actively watched it. It was because it was on after Conan when Carson Daly came on.
It was on at like 2 or 3 in the morning.
Yeah, it was late. It's like the Seth Meyers time slot now. I knew that was time to turn the TV off when Carson Daly came on for me. I cannot.
And wasn't
stand
that kind
Carson
of like
Daly.
a mix of TRL and like late night at that point?
Yeah, I think it was very well. I mean, this sounds really stupid because they all kind of are, but it felt, at least from my recollection, was a lot more celebrity focused. Like he would just do it was like Tom Snyder. You know, Tom Snyder would have his like one guest, I think, and they would just talk for that whole time frame. Oh, you don't know Tom Snyder?
I don't think so.
You don't know Tom Snyder? No.
Apparently not.
Yeah.
At Eric Malcolm says, growing up, it was probably Conan O'Brien who had his late show on after Leno. I have no idea how I could stay up that late back then to watch and still wake up at like 6 a.m. for school because you were young and it didn't matter.
That's right. You were bulletproof.
You could sleep at school. He goes on about masturbating. So, the masturbating bear. Yeah, that was good.
Let's get this straight. He wasn't personally talking about masturbation. He was talking about the masturbating bear.
No, he was talking about the masturbating bear, which was a good skit.
Wanted to clear his name.
It was skimming.
So was he.
At Mystery FREQ said Conan, funny as fuck, and how to adapt to other forms of media. Yeah, I feel like Conan kind of does better and worse at other forms of media. It just depends on what mood he wants to be in. Sometimes I feel like Conan can get a little too bombastic for his own good anymore. But anyway, Pop Culture Reflections Pod, who is at Pop Cult Ref Pod. They're also You Run podcast member, says it's got to be Carson for me. He was the GOAT. Apparently, we need to go back and watch some old Carson Daly clips.
No, I think he's talking about Johnny Carson. There's a little guy, you may have heard about him, Johnny Carson.
Yeah, he was kind of focal point of this movie.
I'm like, who the hell would say Carson Daly was the person they liked? Johnny Carson.
Makes more sense.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, that's fair. I apologize. I hope this gets in to hear me sounding like a dumbass.
Oh, it will.
The Krusty Boys chime back in to explain how they hate Jimmy Fallon because he's such a fucking classic example of look at me, look at me.
Ain't lying.
Yeah, I actually, as much as I hated Jimmy Fallon on SNL, I don't hate him as much on The Tonight Show. I don't watch him that much on The Tonight Show, but I like him more than I liked Leno. So
he's a little more endearing than he was on SNL, but he just never takes a stand. You know, it's just like he's water. He will form to whatever you need him to do.
But I do like him more than I like Leno. So take that for what it's worth. I never got into Leno.
I think Leno got a bad rap, but he was still a shithead, especially with all the Conan stuff. Like, I think
yeah, well, that didn't help.
He's okay, but yeah, I can't forgive him for that.
At Tyler Saban has the Conan doing his whole fucking gypsy dance thing, whatever that was. Belly dance. That's it. Belly dance.
It's where he pulls the strings.
Yeah.
I always hated that.
Yes.
After a while, after
a while, yes.
10 years of it, you're like, okay, dude. But
yeah,
I still love Conan.
At Hazel Monsolo says Craig Ferguson rarely gets the credit he deserves in these discussions, and totally agree. He was very underrated. He just had the misfortune of being in a bad time slot, really. Our friends over at Dissect That Film said Jon Stewart, which I love that someone pulled this out because The Daily Show, when Stewart, I know he's back on now. I haven't watched it since he's been back on, but The Daily Show, when Jon Stewart was on the first time, was a legitimately great television show almost every night. At Jeffy 1979 says, I'm a Letterman, Conan, and Colbert guy. Is Colbert still on?
He is. He's still on. He's
I didn't
on.
know he was still on.
CBS, right?
Okay. I liked his book when it came out, the I Am America and So Can You. I thought his book was pretty funny, but I never got into his show.
What's a book?
Exactly. At Dub IPR says the correct answer, and he has a picture of Gary Shandling. I watched that DVD box set when it came out, and I remember it being good, but I can see why I didn't watch it when it was on too. It didn't pull me away from the Letterman or Conan or whoever was on at the time. At Orange Gummy B1 says, I know I'll probably be alone, and you are, but I'll always be Team James, and he's referring to James Corden. I don't really know a lot about James Corden. I know the social media personality. Like, I've seen him on, what's that fucking show where he drives around and sings or some shit?
That's his show.
Yeah, that's like the only clip that I know from his show. I've never really watched his whole show though. So he's still on too, isn't he?
His was interesting because it was always a panel show. So they always had, like, all the guests were interacting with him and each other. So I thought that was interesting, but I don't really like James Corden. If you like him, that's cool. It's your thing. He just was never my cup of tea. So I didn't watch it because I don't really like him, but I thought it's an interesting concept. I think it's a good way to get a lot of, with these other shows, they just have the guest each at a time, one at a time, and they might stick around for another segment or whatever, but there's very little interaction between the different guests, and that's what that show is about. It's kind of more like not Jules Holland, but what's his name? The English guy. Oh my God, I'm blanking on his name.
Oh, George Stephanopoulos?
No, George Stephanopoulos is not ABC. He's on Good Morning America.
No, he was on CBC I don't know what you're talking about though. I'm thinking of the guy that was on CBC late night.
Maybe. English guy.
Yeah, sure.
Graham Norton.
So, not that guy.
Oh, well, Corden's show reminded me a little bit more of Graham Norton's show. Anyways.
Yeah, this guy used to be on Hockey Night in Canada, and there was a late night show that came on CBC after that. He was actually I think it's George Stephanopoulos.
George Stephanopoulos was Bill Clinton's political strategist or whatever, and now he's on Good Morning America.
No, this is a different guy. Anyways,
Don Cherry.
Back to these. Not him. At Seal Norrell says Johnny Carson, the undisputed king of late night. Right under that is a gif of Arsenio Hall with the come at me, bro, waving thing. That's from Stuart Stee 48771. I'm glad someone said Arsenio Hall. He's often looked over in all these. At 3W Kremer says probably Leno, but would love to see Elvira have a late night talk show. I mean, sure. I really like this one. This is a good one. At Raymond Gonzalez has Space Ghost Coast to Coast. I loved Space Ghost Coast to Coast when that was on.
Yes.
So that's a great one.
Like a hamburger with predator braids.
Yes. And Dino Bones 9 also says Jack Delroy. At Tibbetts says Craig Ferguson for the win. True punk rock late night. Sure. Another vote for Ferguson from at Nomad IXX. And then the last one, who is Mac Greystone, says Magic Johnson, which I think that's a joke, but I wouldn't be
He had a
surprised
show.
if he had a late night show.
He did.
Did he?
Yeah. I think it was on Fox.
I was going to say, I don't
Very, very short-lived.
have any memory of that at all. Sean, who's your favorite late night host?
Got to go with Conan. He's the one I watch the most. You know, arguably somebody like Stewart or Johnny Carson, but I think for me, like in my era, when I was watching late night, because didn't have great stuff to watch otherwise, Conan was always kind of that beacon in the night, you know, that you could watch. And he's continually funny. Like, I think he really revolutionized the way that we look at late night talk shows, being a lot more edgy, not so stodgy and like stiff. I do like David Letterman too. I think he did a lot for the genre too, but Conan's my guy.
So I have the same two guys, but I would flip them. I would say Letterman's probably my favorite, but Conan is right there with them. And I really would just say because Letterman went out on top of his game, like he was still really good when he went out. And Conan, although like I already mentioned, I liked him all the way up until he switched the format of the show for the last like season or so. That's really the only difference to me, is that Conan had like a solid year of like, this just isn't interesting right now to me, where Letterman never did that.
True.
To his discredit, he kept the format the same through the whole run for the most part. Like it was always the Letterman show, but he'd be my favorite. Just, he had such a good dry humor and was such a like dick about it, but it worked for him. I truly doubt that he could be put in that position and succeed in this day and age, but for what it was at the time, it was great.
Just to cut in real quick, Magic Johnson's show was the Magic Hour. It was a syndicated talk show, ran from June to September 1998, ran for 8 weeks before it was canceled.
Was that nationwide or was that only in LA?
Syndicated, so whoever picked it up.
Okay. With that in mind, we're going to say instead of watching the Magic Johnson talk show, you should probably go watch Winning Time, because we both like that show.
Loved it. Yeah.
Even though that's not... Well, anyway, I think we're going to wrap it up here because we've been going for a while. This is going to be probably our longest episode without a guest on it. And I'm going to say, you know what? If you like what we're doing, you can check out all of our old stuff, all of our previous episodes. You can find them at crap.town, which is our site. Find them at yourunpodcast.com, which is the network site. You can find us and all our other cohorts on that site. Follow us on all the social medias. We're at Dewey Pod Monster everywhere. That's where you can, tell me that I'm stupid. Tell me that Arsenio Hall is the best, or Magic Johnson is the best talk show host.
Joan
Whatever
Rivers.
you want to tell me.
Chevy
Joan
Chase.
Rivers. Did he have one too?
Sure did.
Did not know that, dude. Follow us, like, review, all that good shit. We would greatly appreciate it. Sean, wrap us up.
Yeah. So what John didn't mention, if you want your question of the week answered on the show, I guess this one would be probably the best one to have it answered. You can find us on social media at Dewey Pod Monster. You can answer the question of the week. We post it every week, generally on Mondays. We record on Mondays. The question of the week generally goes up on Mondays. So answer the question.
Sometimes Friday.
Sometimes Friday. More than likely, your answer is going to be read on the show. If you are interested in any of my craft beer adventures, you can find me at youtube.drafttherapy.com. You can also find me on social media at Draft Therapy. And again, big thanks to everybody who is voting on the polls, answering the feedback stuff that we asked on the show, on the website, on Spotify. And yeah, so you see all the crap we talked about in the show notes. If you click on any of that stuff, generally it's probably an affiliate link. Maybe we'll get $1 after a gazillion clicks.
So yeah, that's it from us and the Dewey Demonic Pod Monster entity. We'll talk to you next week. Have a good one. Cheers.
You lose, American asshole.
Had to find it. It was worth the wait.
It was worth it. I'm sure you can cut that cap out.
No. Make it last even longer. How do you pronounce this guy's name? David Malkian?
I think it's I think you just don't put the T in there. From what I've heard it a few ways, but I think it's Desmalkian.
Desmalkian.
I think. But if it's wrong, I can promise you we won't be the only people
No one will tell us.
and we won't be the only people this week fucking it up.
Yeah.
Because I've already seen a bunch of people talking about this movie.
She's looking at the psychiatrist. She's looking at June. And let me just re-say that so I can cut around it, because the way I said it was like accusatory. June. When she's looking at June.
June?
June?
That bitch.
You bitch.
The hell is that?
Just give me a second. My fucking dryer.
Right.
It's not even
Okay.
on. It hasn't been on. It's the ghost of Jack Delroy. I'm going to turn the buzzer off. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Why not leave the fucking buzzer on the dryer that you're never going to fucking check? Anyways,
I got distracted.
late night
I'm
shows.
sorry.